Now let's continue our fall camp reports by going out west to BYU and my friend Jeff Hansen, who does a great job with his own video stuff. Are you still doing your daily doses?
It's not daily dose anymore. It's a periodic dose, but yeah, they're still up there. Still,
it doesn't have the same ring, Jeff.
It doesn't. It's getting tougher. It's a grind, man. I tried to do it like you do. It's a lot. I couldn't do it every day.
It's also my job.
Now that helps.
Yeah. You got a whole nother gig to take care of. Sometimes I'm like, okay, I got to get out of bed to do a daily delivery. It's really rough. It's so difficult. But yeah, they're fun. You do a great job with those. And call them what you want. You do a good job. So that's all that really matters.
Appreciate it.
Let's get rolling with this preview of the Cougars. I'm excited, as I told you before we started, to get to go out there this year. It's Kansas State's first trip to one of the newbies. We didn't have one last year. It was kind of weird. They all came to Manhattan, the two that played. So this will be fun. It's the first game in the conference this year for both teams. I'm looking forward to it.
It'll be a lot of fun, man. I think K-State fans, they're going to love it. You're going to love it. It's a different place than anybody, outside of Utah. Different place than you typically watch college football in, but still fun, unique, and it's gorgeous. September is the ideal time.
I would agree. Here we go. Give me your overview where the Cougars are at this point of fall camp.
At this point in fall camp, I think it's the point where everybody's a little bit optimistic. So it's kind of hard to read through what's real and what's just that, hey, 2 weeks of fall camp, everybody's been flying around and everything's going really, really well. But having said that, I do think there is confidence coming out of Provo, and it starts with the quarterback spot. Jake Retzlaff, I think anybody who watched Jake play last year during those last 4 games in November, BYU went 0-4, and Jake did not play particularly well. So there was a lot of pessimism of, holy cow, is this really going to be what BYU runs back in 2024? They add Gary Bohannon, who comes with his own baggage, right? He's got some high upside. He's played really well before in his career, certainly in 2021 with Baylor. But at the end of that, he got pushed out of Baylor, went on to USF, and wasn't very great. So there wasn't a ton of optimism there either. But both guys have played well so far in the fall. Jake has improved his mechanics. He's done some stuff that has people thinking, okay, he certainly isn't an NFL guy at this point, but he looks like he's a guy who can win some football games. And Gary Bohannon, he worked with an individual quarterback coach this offseason, and he said he did that. That was the first time in his life that he's ever had his own personal quarterback coach. And you could see that this is a different guy than what was at BYU in the spring. There's a lot of optimism that, again, he's not going to be some first-round guy. BYU doesn't have, Zach Wilson or Jaron Hall again, but he's a guy who can win football games in this conference. I think there's a lot of people looking at Oklahoma State last year and saying, hey, if Alan Bowman can come in and do what he did, there's got to be a lot of other things that have to fall into place. But if Bowman can help Oklahoma State play as well as they did a year ago, certainly Gary Bohannon and Jake Retzlaff have shown enough that they can do that. A lot of optimism. I think outside of the quarterback position, a lot of justifiable reasons for optimism. But at quarterback, it's a little bit of a wait-and-see mode.
If you get good Gary Bohannon, you're going to get a good quarterback. That dude was lighting it up in 2021. He got injured in Manhattan. They put in his backup, who absolutely lit up the Wildcats. And, it was incredible. But boy, that dude can play. I remember everyone thinking, oh, good, he's going out of the game. And then it got worse. What is the key strength, the most important strength to this BYU offense?
The BYU offense struggled so much on the offensive line last year. I mean, really, you had Kingsley Suamataia, who got drafted by the Chiefs. I believe it was the second round. Mm-hmm. He was great. He was a former 5-star guy. He was phenomenal. He did not play well last year. He got drafted based on his athleticism and his potential, not based on what he put on tape at BYU a year ago. And really everybody else along the offensive line, it was just week in and week out struggles. Running game never really got going. Pass protection was hit and miss. But you saw BYU, the way that they adjusted immediately after the season wasn't run to the portal and say, hey, we got a talent problem. It was immediately fire their coach and go get a new offensive line coach. That it was pretty clear, at least from my seat, looking on from the outside looking in, Kalani Sitake and Aaron Roderick said, no, we got a coaching problem. We don't have a talent problem. We got a coaching problem. They brought in TJ Woods, who comes from Georgia Southern, where he wasn't, super spectacular at Georgia Southern, but not very many people are. When you go through TJ Woods' career, he's produced elite level results at Utah State, at Wisconsin, at Oregon State, when Kalani Sitake was there. So there's a lot of trust and familiarity there, and a lot of confidence that TJ Woods, with mostly the same guys running it back, has fixed the offensive line. They may not be a top 10 unit, but a very good unit that this offense can rely on throughout the year.
Okay, what is the biggest concern coming into the season for the offense?
Yeah, I mean, it's the quarterback spot. And aside from that quarterback spot, the running back, the health, I guess, of the running back position. LJ Martin was fantastic last year as a true freshman, got on the field a little bit earlier than expected and played surprisingly well. There's been some injury concerns, and he says he's fine. The coaches say he's fine, but just about every reporter in Provo says, I don't think he's fine. So a little bit of what's really going to happen. I think the coaches are being a little bit coy about the reality of the situation. He may miss the first couple of games of the season, and that would be a big blow for an offense that's just trying to figure things out in the beginning, the first few games, the non-conference part of the schedule.
Okay, going across the ball, what's the strength of this BYU defense?
Yeah, I think the strength of the defense, and it's a little bit surprising, is the linebackers. BYU lost Ben Bywater. When you lose a guy like Ben Bywater to a medical retirement right before fall camp, that hurts. But BYU is pretty well positioned to just kind of absorb that loss and move forward. I think that the linebackers, that they've got depth. They run at least two deep at every position, and you can make an argument that there's not a whole lot of separation between the twos and threes either. The linebackers are a pretty good unit. They're really, really young. So some of that experience and do they know what to do in every situation, that will come into play. But the overall talent level and the depth of that talent is the best that BYU has had in a really long time.
What's the concern on the defense side of the ball?
BYU finished last season with 11 sacks total. They just could not get after the quarterback. And it's ironic because Tyler Batty led the Big 12 in quarterback pressures and hurries. So he was getting back there. He was just a step late and not converting on sacks. How does BYU do in that pass rusher? They invested a ton. Their 2024 recruiting class, there's a ton of pass rushers, a ton of edge guys from both that traditional defensive end spot and from the linebacker spot. They want to get after the quarterback. That's a big deal. And then the interior of the defensive line as well. They've moved some of those guys who were probably playing out of position a year ago and were playing on the edge. They've added a little bit of beef to them and moved them back inside where they probably belong. But how does that transition go? Really, that whole defensive line is kind of a question mark. There's a lot of confidence because the talent. They did add a ton of talent. But how does it all come together? Everybody's in wait-and-see mode there.
Interesting. Okay, so what defines a successful season for BYU coming off that disappointing year, and what needs to go right for that to happen?
Yeah, it's a bowl game for BYU. If they can get back to bowl eligibility, especially with this schedule, I think everybody in Provo is going to be feeling pretty darn confident. They got a tough draw from Brett Yormark and the folks at the Big 12. They've got K-State, Kansas, Arizona, Utah, and Oklahoma State. They're all on the schedule. BYU does travel to Utah. Everybody else, they do get them at home. But for BYU, who's trying to get back to bowl eligibility, you almost would rather have the winnable games at home and the losable games on the road. That advantage doesn't, really help so much. That's going to be tough. What has to go right? BYU has to take care of business in the games that are there, because with those 5 teams on the schedule, maybe BYU upsets one, maybe you can steal 2 of those, but anything beyond that, I mean, that's a pipe dream, right? Realistically, that's just not going to happen. So BYU's got to take care of business on the road at Wyoming, on the road at SMU. Going to be a tough game. They've got to take care of Arizona State on the road. You can't lose to Houston on senior day, last game of the year. So there's some of those games that are probably more in that 50-50 range, but that BYU can't miss on. They've got to really convert on those 50-50 games because there's some really tough games on the slate.
Well, I think you just answered this question. What happens if they fall short of those successful expectations? Would it be losing a lot of those games?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it would be. It wouldn't take much. SMU is a very good football team this year.
Mhm.
You could lose that game really quickly. Traveling to Wyoming, a lot of Big 12 foes have seen that in the past, right? That's a tough place to play, 7,200 feet. You know, it's tough when BYU fans are saying, hey, elevation's going to be an issue. It's a thing, right? Wyoming's
Yep.
tough, and there's some deep, passionate hatred between Wyoming and BYU that dates back 100 years. So that's going to be a big environment. We call it Laramie. They call it Laradice. Whatever you want to decide, it's going to be a hopping place and a big, big game for the state of Wyoming. BYU's walking into a hornet's nest. Talent-wise, they should win. They could easily lose that game. So,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, don't lose the 50-50 games. Don't lose the games that you're supposed to win. And BYU should be in a spot to be able to have success, but you drop one or two of those, and it's going to be really tough sledding.
I kind of feel like you're one step ahead of me in my questions. That's how good Jeff Hansen is. That's it. That's how good he is. Every schedule seems to have that game that the rest of the year kind of teeters on that outcome, or at least it feels that way. A linchpin game that a win moves you forward pretty solidly, and a loss kind of sets you back maybe for the rest of the year. Is there a linchpin game on the schedule for the Cougars?
Yeah, and BYU will get back to their independent roots where the big games mattered right off the bat. I think
Mhm.
it's week 2 against SMU. That game's going to be tough. SMU is going to be motivated. They are going to want to win, all that good stuff, right? BYU has to win that game. They really, really do. If they come out of the non-conference schedule with a 2-1 record, it's really hard to find 4 wins in that Big 12 slate. They got to go perfect against the non-ranked Big 12 teams. That's going to be tough. That SMU game gives them that 1-game buffer. Without that 1-game buffer, they don't have a buffer. So I think that week 2 game against SMU is a really, really, really big deal for BYU.
Okay, give me your record prediction after the 12 games of regular season. What will the numbers say about BYU?
Yeah, most the sports books have BYU at about 4.5. Some say 5.5. So it's going to be a dogfight to get to bowl eligibility. I do think this team is more talented than they showed last year. A lot of those guys are back. There's a lot of seniors, a lot of upperclassmen. They had some coaching and execution issues. I think those are easier to fix than saying, we got to find a bunch of talent from somewhere. Let's get it onto the field. I like BYU's talent. I think they get to 6-6, and I think that's I've gone back and forth throughout the summer, but I think 6-6 is where I land as the season is finally about to get underway.
My observation is everyone likes Kalani Sitake a lot.
Yeah.
Is there a record that puts him in peril to lose his job?
5-7. If they don't get to that bowl game, look, I mean, BYU doesn't miss bowl games. That's the standard at BYU, and to miss 2 in a row, there's going to be a lot of upset people. And BYU has kind of a limited head coaching pool. You got to be, it's not an official rule, but you got to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ. I mean, everybody has kind of done that so far, which really limits BYU and their options. And so right now, especially if the defense plays well and the offense falters and then BYU misses a bowl game, Jay Hill is kind of been a head coach at the FCS level. He's been really, really good. You sort of have a natural transition plan. There will be a lot of people in Provo kind of pushing to say, hey, maybe this is the opportunity to make that change and say, let's invest in Jay Hill and let this be his program rather than let him be a chess piece in somebody else's program.
I've never really asked you this, but what was kind of the evaluation by BYU? I know they had a lot of struggles last year, and it wasn't necessarily related to being in the Big 12, but what were the thoughts after the first Big 12 tour?
I think that and it's a little bit maybe foreshadowing for the Pac-12 foes that are coming in. Kalani Sitake, Aaron Roderick, and Jay Hill were all at Utah when they went into the Pac-12. And so I think they thought they knew what to expect with that jump from a non-P5 into that power league. They were very surprised at how much more physical the Big 12 conference is than the Pac-12 was. Every team, if you watch Utah play in the Pac-12, Utah's very physical. They dominated the line of scrimmage. Everybody in the Big 12 kind of plays like Utah. They were the weirdo, out in the Pac-12 where there's a lot of finesse football, and they just wanted to punch you in the mouth. how many 1,000-yard rushers are in the Big 12. And I think that really caught BYU by surprise with just how physical this league was. I think they were bracing for a speed change. They were bracing for open offenses and kind of that, the Big 12 10 years ago. But now this is a punch you in the mouth, run the football kind of league. And BYU was not prepared for that. And I think that was the biggest surprise. And ultimately, as the season went on, the depth just got to a point that BYU couldn't hang. And you saw what happened in those last 5 games.
Yeah, that's kind of a reflection of all the schools that came in last year. They're all talking about having to improve their depth, build it back up. And you just couldn't get by being thin at any position in the Big 12 because it'll get exposed and you get, honestly, you probably get more injuries in this conference than other conferences because it is a very physical conference. Jeff, thank you very much. We plan on having you on many a time whenever possible throughout this season, because not only do you do a good job talking about BYU, but I love you, man. I love you.
We love you around here in Provo. We're excited for you to come out, man.
Yeah, I'm fired up. We have the mountain tour this year. It gets to Provo, Boulder, and then Morgantown, all road trips.
There you go.
So
there you go.
Fired up.
That's the scenic road trip.
You got it. That is the BYU Fall Camp Report. We will continue with more this week. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Jeff, for being on.